Hello, my name is Diya Patel. I am 15 years old, and today I would like to speak about bees, how they're slowly disappearing, and what impact their extinction could have on us and the planet as a whole. Firstly, in a beehive, there are three main types of bees. 1. The queen bee. There is one queen bee per hive, and her role is to produce offspring. Often, almost all of the bees in the colony are born from this one queen bee. 2. Worker bees. Worker bees, also known as forager bees, are female bees that will leave the hive in search of flowers from which they will take nectar. They will then take this nectar home, where it will be used to feed bee larvae. 3. Drone bees. Drone bees are male bees that are unable to sting or collect nectar and pollen, and their purpose is to mate with the queen bee. These bees are dying at an exceptionally accelerated rate. In the 81 years between 1940 and now, bee levels in the United States have decreased by nearly half, from roughly 5 million bee colonies then to about 2.66 million bee colonies in 2020. That means that the United States has lost about 2.34 million bee colonies in 80 years, and we have less than 90 years to go before all of the bees in this country are lost. Now, seasonal death of bees is perfectly normal. On average, 5 to 10% of the bees in a hive die out in the winter due to unfavorable weather. In a particularly bad winter, 15 to 20% die. However, this still wouldn't be considered severe, because all of these dead bees are typically replenished in the spring. What isn't normal are our current levels of bee loss. Right now in the United States, we lose 30 to 50% of our bees. That's a number that can't be naturally replaced. There are several reasons as to why so many bees are dying. The first factor that we should talk about is colony collapse disorder, or CCD. Colony collapse disorder, or CCD, is characterized by a low or non-existent amount of adult bees in the hive, but with the queen bee present as well as honey and the growing larvae. Without a continuous source of honey, these larvae and the queen bee will die too after their supply runs out. The interesting thing about CCD is that the bodies of the dead bees are usually nowhere near the hive. CCD affects a higher proportion of honeybees than most other bees. Firstly, it's necessary to say that all pesticides as a whole are generally harmful. Before we get into the science, logically, look at the people spraying pesticides on the screen. They're wearing hazmat suits. They clearly wouldn't need them if pesticides weren't dangerous. Secondly, they're incredibly harmful to not only bees and all pests, but also the microorganisms found in soil. Microorganisms are extremely important, and they are the sole difference between fertile soil and infertile dirt. On that note, another major factor for our loss of bees are herbicides, especially weedicides. Weedicides are good for one thing, doing their job, killing weeds. Think of it this way. Many weeds produce flowers. Now, when weedicides are sprayed onto these weeds, not only will the weeds die, but so will their flowers. While weeds and their flowers are entirely undesirable to us, they're simply another food source to bees. For that reason, weedicides take part in the bee loss situation. Furthermore, glyphosate, the herbicide pictured here, is actually incredibly harmful. While it is widely used here in the United States, glyphosate is actually completely banned, partially banned, or at least in the process of being banned in, pictured here in light purple, 41 countries around the world, including Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Australia, India, the United Kingdom, and many more countries. These bans on glyphosate were placed after the IARC, or the International Agency for Research on Cancer, classified the common pesticides as a probable human carcinogen. In simple terms, this means that while it isn't exclusively proven that glyphosate causes cancer, other studies and observations have concluded that a high risk is a likely option. So, on a little side note, watch what you're using on your plants. If the label says glyphosate, do not waste your money on it. Next, we can move to insecticides. Insecticides, like their fellow weedicides, aren't really good for anything besides their jobs, which is to kill insects. Now, there's no real way to kill the bad bugs while keeping all the good bugs alive, so all insects Helpful and harmful alike, bees included, are killed or at least partially affected from this branch of chemicals. One particularly dangerous class of insecticides are neonicotinoids, also commonly known as neonics. Neonics work similarly to the way an extremely high dosage of nicotine does, attacking nerve cells and at low dosages damaging brain function, causing bees to be disoriented and impacting their ability to learn and use new information, navigate to and from the hive, and reproduce with each other. At higher doses, neonics will cause the neurons to overexcite and cause symptoms similar to seizures, and will even stop the nerve cells from working properly and possibly even cause cell death. This is one of the most effective pesticides ever made, which makes it one of the most toxic pesticides ever created as well. Neonics were developed in the 1990s as a response to pests over time becoming immune to other pesticides, and they work because they kill them too quickly for them to be able to react and adapt to the toxins in their body. Last but not least, neonics are systemic pesticides, which means that one usage of the chemical is long-lasting, and rather than staying on the surface of the plant, it is absorbed into the plant. This is problematic, mainly because, unlike other pesticides, neonics can stay in a plant for months or years. This is particularly impactful for bees and other pollinators because they feed from affected pollen and nectar. Lastly, bees are hugely impacted by the effects of climate change for a multitude of reasons, but most notably these three: loss of habitat, disease, and abnormal shifts of temperature. Generally, when temperatures become too warm for them, bees will migrate to cooler areas and build new hives there. Now, it is more difficult for them to do that because studies find in North America and Europe, bee territory has shrunk by nearly 200 miles and will continue to shrink if climate change persists. Next, due to climate change, bees are becoming more susceptible to several different types of parasites. Two common ones are varroa mites, which are on the top, and Nosema ceranae, which are on the bottom. Both of these parasites contribute to the colony collapse disorder and overall loss of bees. It has been proven that Nosema ceranae actually thrives in warmer weather, while it is not as commonly found in colder temperatures. So, as climate change has been gradually warming up the planet, bees have to bear a heavier burden of being more affected by pesticides. And speaking of rising temperatures, what is happening now is flowers bloom earlier in the spring than they're supposed to. This causes a delay in between when pollen is produced and when bees harvest pollen, which isn't good for them. The manner in which bees are dying are at rates consistent with a mass extinction. It's actually lesser known to most that we've already entered the world's sixth mass extinction event. It's known as the Holocene extinction, and it began about 12,000 years ago. The most recent mass extinction prior to this one was when a meteor struck the Earth and wiped out 3/4 of our animals, including all of the dinosaurs, about 66 million years ago. Climate change is closely linked with the extinction of several species in the world. In fact, each of the previous 5 mass extinctions have had a rapid change of climate involved, not unlike what we're currently going through. A mass extinction is not something to take lightly. In fact, each one wiped out about 70 to 95% of the world's living beings with it: animals, plants, and several more classes of species. At the rate that we're going, bees barely have a century or two before they're gone, as well as several other animals. While some flowering plants can rely on other insects and birds to pollinate, bees are by far the most successful, and there also lies the fact that some plants can only be pollinated by certain types of bees. There are also some birds that feed on bees, and without them the birds would lose a food source. So bees are crucial pollinators, and without them, several other species will deteriorate as well. Plus, not only will plants and animals be in jeopardy, due to lack of pollination, fruit, vegetables, and nuts will be jeopardized as well. Then there would be a complete chaos. In fact, for every 3 bites of food that we have, one of them is made with the help of a bee. If we lose bees, we lose 1/3 of our food, which, combined with our growing population and already established issue of world hunger, can have disastrous effect. Not only do we depend on fruit, vegetables, and nuts, but so do thousands and maybe even millions of species, all of which we cannot protect, especially if we're starving ourselves. Long story short, if we save the bees, we'll be saving millions of plants and thousands of animals, ourselves included. And now is the most crucial question. How exactly do we save the bees? Well, in order to do so, I'd recommend a good balance of helping bees directly and preserving the climate, which helps bees indirectly. Indirectly, as we said before, your goal is to preserve a climate. This, explained earlier, will not only provide as beneficial for the bees, but for all living things, including ourselves. There are some simple things that anyone can do to improve climate change. Something that anybody and everybody can do is save energy. You can do this in several ways, such as opting for a walk or bike ride to places at closer distance to you, rather than driving everywhere and having unnecessary gas wastage and car emissions. Next, try to save energy on your air conditioning. You can do this by keeping your house a little colder in the winter and a little warmer in the summer. Instead, to combat the temperature, you can bundle up a little or take some layers off. Next, try to have a garden and eat more homemade food instead of buying a majority of what you eat. This is healthier for you too. Lastly, if it's a nice day outside, try to air dry your clothes instead of using the clothes dryer. Note that all of these tips can also help you save money. It's a win-win. If you want to give the bees some extra help, here are some actions you can do as well. First, and this one is very important, don't use pesticides. Most pesticides, whether chemical such as glyphosate or natural such as soap and water or lemon juice, are going to harm not only the pests but the good insects too, as well as the microorganisms and the pH of the soil. This doesn't mean to just let your garden get devoured by the bad bugs, of course. Some healthier, natural options are allowing more beneficial insects, such as ladybugs, which are ones that eat pests, to enter your garden, and to plant your garden in sunlight to avoid having a dark and damp situation, which attracts more bugs as a whole. Another way you can help bees is by planting a large flower garden. That way, you have a safe space for bees where they can freely collect nectar and pollen. Trees can also serve as shelter. And lastly, don't eat a lot of honey. Honey has its health benefits, and while it's good for us, taking it away from the bees isn't that good for them. So reserve the honey for special occasions only. For example, honey is a natural sore throat reliever. If you take a spoonful of honey if you aren't feeling well, it's better than using honey just for its taste, as there are plenty of other natural sweeteners that don't come from animals, such as maple syrup or agave syrup. So, a brief recap. Bees don't have much time left. We spoke about events that may occur much faster if we don't do anything at all. We also went over what the primary causes of their huge population decreases were, as well as how to combat them. So now, it's a simple matter of implementing what we've learned. These are my references. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope that you've learned from it and are inspired to make a change in your lifestyle by incorporating more compassion for bees during your day. Thank you.